Right. There's been so much discussion of the need to work across sectors. We thought it might be interesting to focus on one particular area of concern where that's very necessary, and so we chose antibiotic resistance. And so now I'd like to introduce Professor Joakim Larsson from the University of Gothenburg, where he directs the Center for Research into Antimicrobial Resistance, for a conversation. Joakim. So, antibiotic resistance. Part of the solution is to produce new antibiotics. How is that effort going?
Well, could have gone better, I could say. Some would say it's been a disaster for decades. If we talk about new classes of antibiotics against our most serious infections with what we call gram-negative bacteria, no new classes have been reaching the market for many decades. So that's a huge problem. We have got variants of a theme that are valuable, but no new classes.
And is that a result of the fact that it's just too difficult, or that there has been underinvestment, or both?
Both. So the companies don't really make money the way the market works today on antibiotics. And I think also we have picked those low-hanging fruits that we picked some decades ago, and it's become genuinely difficult to find new drugs.
And so I suppose the question is, why is resistance developing? And then?
Well, resistance comes automatically, basically, when we expose bacteria to antibiotics through Darwinian evolution, basically, through selection of the fittest. So if some bacteria acquires the ability to grow in the presence of antibiotics, we get resistance. And I think for every antibiotic that has reached the market, resistance has developed in at least some of the bacteria that they are targeted against.
And how big a problem is this now?
Well, as big as at least 1 million people, or up to 5 million people dying from bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics a year. So it's a huge thing.
So there are a number of different strategies for combating it other than producing new drugs, and we need to talk about those. Tell me what they are.
So if we look at the map of the resistance situation in the world, we see huge differences between different countries. And the reason for that is largely that we have worked differently in terms of managing transmission of resistant bacteria. And some countries have been able to work much more with what we call antibiotic stewardship, using the right antibiotic in the right place. So avoiding the overuse of antibiotics, both in humans and in animals. So,
I mean, but how, the spheres of life that we have to think about, they become many and various. So, I mean, give a picture of the sort of areas that have to control their use of antibiotics, and we have to think about if we're really going to stop the spread of resistance.
First of all, of course, the use in humans, which is important because we have the pathogens there, so we expose them directly to the antibiotics there. Also in animals, we use much more antibiotic in animals on the planet than we are for humans. But also the environment, where we are releasing in some places massive amounts of antibiotics into the environment that completely unnecessarily drives resistance that then might come back to ourselves.
So that argues that we have to think about the way we deal with what, sanitation systems, or?
Sanitation, particularly in terms of how we spread bacteria, fecal bacteria, so that we get infections that we then treat, but also how we treat our wastes containing antibiotics. That also contributes to the picture.
It's a very complicated picture. I mean, how do you begin to think about, how do you begin to dissect out the parts that need to be dealt with?
I think we need to work with antibiotic resistance similarly as we heard this morning from a sort of a One Health perspective, when we talked about the definition of health, in that different pieces come together. We have human health, we have animal health, and we have the environment. And the bacteria and their genes, they're moving across these three compartments. So it will not work out if we just focus on the human health side. We need to work in all three areas to really effectively manage this problem.
It's such an enormous task to focus on three areas. I mean, we were just talking about prioritization and how to choose between things. And it's also less, if you like, I suppose, sexy. I mean, it's kind of sexy to go after a new drug. To deal with, everything is hard work and troublesome. So
who wouldn't like to have just a pill and then everything's fixed, right? That's the simple and easy solution. But what has paid off the most in the past has been investment in the less sexy things, such as transmission control. So I think that's something we need to focus on more.
But you see all these points of action, if you like. How do you convince people to work together across these different sectors?
So I think we need to tap on the selfishness in action, actually. So sometimes we hear the comparison between antibiotic resistance and climate change in terms of that both are dilemmas of a type that we're so dependent of what everyone else is doing. So in climate change, everybody depends on how other countries use fossil fuels, for example. And that's also true for antibiotic resistance. We are dependent on how other countries manage antibiotic resistance.
And I suppose another parallel there is that it's been basically richer nations who have benefited most, but poorer nations are perhaps suffering more.
True. We are using actually more antibiotics in the richer countries than we are in the poorer. But in the poorer countries, they in general have less transmission control. So that's why they have a bigger problem, I guess, to a large extent. Now, coming back to that difference here, in that I think that countries that have been able to invest in transmission control and antibiotic stewardship, they get paid off from that. So they have a better resistance situation. So I think convincing decision makers that if you invest in those aspects in your country, that will pay off, both in the short term and the medium term. I'm talking decades. So you will win, even if the others don't do their best.
So that's very different from climate change, that local action benefits local people.
Exactly, and that's an important message.
So you're really playing on people's, if you like, national selfishness.
In a way, and within a hospital as well, right? If you do it within a hospital, your hospital will be better off in terms of controlling hospital-transmitted diseases as well. But of course...
Perhaps selfishness isn't the right word to use.
Maybe not, but it is a driving force in many parts of the world, if we are honest.
One should be honest, yes.
Of course, I have to say here that it's not that easy, of course. We have countries that have much less opportunities to invest in those important things because of their economy, because of their political system, etc. They don't have the resources to do it as efficiently as others. But I think it's the overall way to go.
We titled this a slow pandemic. Why is it so slow?
It's slower than a pandemic driven by an airborne virus. They transmit very fast, as we have learned. Bacteria also travel across the world as fast as a jumbo jet, but they usually don't spread between people as fast as some of these viruses we generally are speaking about.
And that slowness is perhaps something to play on, again, because there is time for action.
There is time for action. I think there is still much to do that can be done that isn't done. We need to have, should have a, like the climate panel, we should have something similar, I think, also for antibiotic resistance to get together, because it is indeed a global challenge.
So you come from a university where there is a center for the research. Are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful in the sense that we can do much more. We can manage the problem, but I do not really have the sense of that we can solve it, because bacteria will continue and develop resistance when we are coming up with new drugs, like they have been doing for the last 80 years or so, unless someone thinks completely out of the box on how we should treat bacterial diseases. And that would be worthy of a new Nobel Prize.
Maybe that someone is sitting in this audience or watching online. Thank you very much indeed. That's been a fabulous conversation, and I'm sorry that we really don't have time to explore this in the detail it deserves, but it's been a lovely insight. Thank you very much indeed, Joakim.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you.